Steven Universe, released in 2013 for the Wii U by Cartoon Network and directed by now revered indie auteur Rebecca Sugar, has been a massive success in the general gaming market. Having received 5 major content patches as well as a port to the Nintendo Switch, it's become one of the most talked about games on the internet, and its upcoming sequel Steven Universe Future, which premiered at E3 2019, has been hotly anticipated. But how much potential does Steven Universe have as a speed game? Let's dive into the game's premier category, Title Percent, to find out. Part 1. Title Percent and Optimal Movement. Since its release, Steven Universe has had a small but dedicated community, mostly based around single-level runs. Since the game effectively reloads between levels, and no progress is carried over, the Any Percent category failed to capture the community's interest. There have been a few attempts, presumably just so someone could say that they did it, and the world record currently sits at 23 hours, 19 minutes, and 11 seconds. So, yeah, there's a reason the community has mostly ignored this category. Popular levels to run include Bubble Buddies, which abuses Connie's physics interaction with the unbreakable bubble to gain infinite momentum, and Back to the Barn, which can be cheesed by pause buffering while Pearl and Peridot's hitboxes overlap. What nobody in the speedrun community thought to examine for the first few years after release, however, was the game's intro. The game's intro, as it appears in the base game and Content Pack 1, takes place during a scripted sequence. This term refers to any scenario in which the player does not have access to Steven's full moveset. Because of this, many near-universally applicable techniques used in single-level runs, such as bubble bouncing and shield clipping, are unavailable in this category. However, being in a scripted sequence does carry several advantages, as we'll examine later in this video. Here's a clip of the intro speedrun, which does not utilize any major glitches. I'll be pausing periodically to point out several small time saves and optimizations. By mashing A during Pearl and Amethyst's final line, we can cause Steven to start his roll on the first possible frame. Since we spend so little time in the rolling animation, the camera freaks out a little. But this has no lasting effect on the run.
Gold gems will always save the day. And if you think we can, we'll always...
The cutscene is programmed not to transition here until Steven's x-axis position exceeds Garnet's. The dev-intended method of going about this is by mashing the L and R buttons to continuously input the sprint command. However, by remapping the sprint action to the right analog stick in all 4 directions, we can input the command almost twice as fast by simply spinning the analog stick. This causes us to trigger the transition to the next phase of the intro slightly faster.
Find a way, that's why the people of this world.
The trigger for skipping past this scene is Steven's reaction command, not the grill hitting the floor as is commonly believed. By hitting the reaction button as soon as Greg starts to move, we can cancel Greg's animation, saving a few frames. This trick is pretty tight, but it's not frame perfect. In fact, many players discover it in casual playthroughs before the skip intro option is unlocked.
Garnet, Amethyst, and Pearl, and Steven!
So that's the run with optimal movement. A few early transitions, an animation cancel, and everything else is locked behind scripted sequence controls. This is as good as it gets, right? Wrong. We can do better. Part 2. Scripted Momentum Compensation. During Steven Universe gameplay, the game will enter scripted sequences in which events have to trigger with precise timing to work correctly. However, due to the game's notoriously buggy physics engine, objects will often enter scripted sequences with more momentum than the developers intended. To prevent this kind of anomaly from breaking these sequences entirely, the devs implemented a hidden mechanic called Scripted Momentum Conservation, or SMC for short. It's an important system. You can actually disable it in the debug menu, which more often than not leads to Sapphire clipping through the spaceship during jailbreak. Basically, there's a timeline for scripted events that controls when they trigger. This is everything from starting animations to transitioning between scenes. When an object with a trigger attached to it enters a scripted sequence with more speed than it's supposed to have, the SMC will kick in and shift every other trigger on the timeline forwards, essentially speeding up the rest of the scripted sequence to match. Do you see where I'm going with this? That's right! Since the entire intro is a scripted sequence, if we can get SMC to activate during the intro, we can apply that speed boost to the entire rest of the run. All we need to do is get Steven to acquire momentum in a scene in which the game expects him to be stationary. And luckily for us, we can do just that. In the warp pad section of the intro, Steven transitions between two states. On the ground, he has access to his limited scripted ground moveset, which is basically just walking around. When the warp pad activates, all his momentum is cancelled and he transitions into the air tumble state, in which he accepts no controller inputs at all. However, there's a single frame when the warp pad activates, when Steven is in the air, but not yet tumbling, and therefore has access to his full aerial moveset. If we input an air dash on this frame, Steven gains horizontal momentum in a scene where he is only supposed to have vertical momentum, and SMC does the rest of the work for us. This speeds up the remainder of the intro by about 10%, and better yet, all of our other time saves still work. The analog sprint trick is totally unaffected, and while the window to cancel Greg's animation is considerably smaller, it's not impossible. This trick was huge for the run, and upon its discovery single-handedly kicked off interest in the title percent for this game. So this is it, right? A 10% increase bringing the total time down to... There's nothing else we can do to improve on this route, right? Wrong. We can do better. Part 3. The Garnet Death Glitch. Whenever Steven is in a scripted sequence, he has a different stat layout, notably 0 defense and 0 HP. This is important for cutscene battles that require Steven to die in one hit, such as the Jasper fight at the end of the return, and the start of the Lapis Lazuli boss before you unlock the shield. The strange thing is that this moment here, where Garnet ruffles Steven's hair, is technically an attack. Actually, anything in the game that one character does to another is an attack. It's just easier to script interactions if they all use the same framework. Now, usually this isn't a problem, since Steven is coded to be invincible during the intro cutscene, but we can get around this through a technique called mortality storage. Remember that roll from the beginning, the one we mashed to get on the first frame? Since the roll isn't part of Steven's limited moveset, the game needs to temporarily apply the standard gameplay template to him, which, aside from giving him access to the roll, makes him able to take damage. If we press the button to cancel the roll on the frame the scene transitions and keep holding it, the game will still change Steven's moveset and stats to the scripted state, but won't be able to change his mortality, since the game thinks he's still in the middle of an action he started while mortal. And if we hold that mortality until Garnet touches us... No! That's right, we die. Since there isn't a scripted death here, the game defaults to spawning us at the next place it considers a stable location, which is, you guessed it, the title screen. And that's the run! Garnet Death Glitch was a huge discovery, saving about 5 seconds. But a lot of runners were disappointed in how it cut out the running and Greg cancel tricks, which are still used in the lesser ran title percent no deaths category. I hope I've managed to kindle some interest in Steven Universe as a speed game. I love this community, but for such a great game, it deserves to be so much bigger. Thanks, and peace out.